to make a living necessarily. Um, so I worked for a landscaping company that did design, build, and maintain. And I think that's a really good way to learn about how to give advice because if you've actually taken care of plants, then you're not going to advise people on a design that's going to be unmaintainable or plants that are going to get out of scale for the site or that sort of thing. So primarily now I'm a consulting arborist and horticulturist and an educator. And I first designed this course for a Garden for the Environment in San Francisco. Has anybody ever heard of that place? It's called Garden for the Environment in San Francisco. And it's a teaching garden and it's owned by the water department. And it's partially flat and partially sloped. So we did a class on gardening on a slope, which included a tour of the sloped part of their garden. So we could see different strategies they had used to manage the slope. I adapted it for this location, and obviously we aren't going to have a place to tour. And that's why you have so much paper in your handout, I guess. But I'm here to advocate for slow gardening above all. So we like slow food. I'm a fan of slow gardening. So I don't think that we should move in somewhere or decide suddenly that we're going to garden and we're going to rip everything up and transform it in a month. Because primarily when we make those kind of fast decisions without the homework and consideration that goes into it, we end up with things that maybe aren't ideal. Plants that don't make it, or we discover, gee, it's actually really hard for me to get to these plants to pull weeds, or for anybody I hire to do that. Or maybe I'm wasting a lot of water. The water's running down the hill, or I didn't install irrigation and I thought these plants would make it because they're drought tolerant, but they aren't thriving. So I'm going to advocate instead for that we consider and work out a lot of the non-plant infrastructure, get that settled, and then plant. And that's sort of, everyone likes the plants. That's the fun part. And I recognize that. But I learned really recently or over the time that looking at plants that don't make it is really depressing. So I'd rather say, let's divide the garden project into small pieces and maybe you plant one area and then you plant another area. But in the meantime, you get your infrastructure worked out. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Problems with slopes. What type of problems do we have gardening on a slope? Anyone?
Water running down the hill.
Water runoff, big one. Yes. Anything else? Absolutely. Anything else?
You have to be good physical condition.
Yes. Access is huge. It can range from difficult to dangerous to impossible. Yes. Anything else? That's right. And the reverse of that is fire actually travels faster uphill, right? Objects travel faster downhill, but fire travels faster uphill. Yes. And we can also have uneven water distribution. We can have water that pools in some places and just doesn't stay in other places. And that also means uneven nutrient distribution. Yes, and some other characteristics which could be good, could be bad, is that there are microclimates. Usually the top is warmer and the bottom is cooler. We may have radical changes in exposure even within 1 year. And we need to be aware of what cardinal direction does our slope face? Is it north, east, west, south? It's going to make a big difference with what kind of plants we choose and how we program our watering system. Now, there's a little silver lining, and that is if it's hard for you to get to the plants, it may also be hard for people to vandalize the plants or steal them. And certain animals may find it difficult to get up there as well. So just a silver lining there. So I would say the first step in slow gardening is to gather your information. Determine things like the sun exposure, how it changes, where are your hot spots, where places will remain in the sun all day or most of the day year round, and what areas are going to be sort of more changeable. I almost said, multiple personalities, but there are some areas that could be blasting sun part of the year and deep shade part of the year. That's really difficult to plan for. and what areas are pretty much deep shade the whole time. Take a look when it rains hard, or if you want to test with a hose. How does the water move? Where does it stick around? Where does it go away? We may want to think about how we can create some contouring or some places for water to stick around by mimicking where it already sticks around. And if it goes away, can we direct where it goes instead of out in the street? Can it be redirected to go back into the landscape? But we won't know how to do that until we watch how it's happening already. You may want to take a look at your soil type if there is soil. And I included on your handout a flow chart for testing your soil type by feel. Now, if you are going to do a field test, I recommend that you take your samples from a variety of spots on the slope, and you'll only need to dig in the top 6 to 8 inches. And the act of taking that sample is going to show you a lot already, because if it's not easy to dig or you can't dig at all, that's telling you something, isn't it? If when you dig you find a lot of roots, well, that's telling you it's a happy place for roots to grow. That means that there is some nutrient and oxygen and water in the soil. So you take what we call blended sample from throughout the garden. Depending on the size, it could be 4, 6, 8, 10 samples. Mix them up, and then you really only need one handful of that blended sample. And then there's a flow chart that I included, which basically just involves getting a little bit wet, squeezing it into a ball, trying to make it into a ribbon, and feeling whether it's gritty or smooth. And that's going to tell you a lot about what type of soil you have, and that's going to help you choose plants, and that's going to help you program your watering system. Hopefully you will have one or put one in. And the other thing you might want to observe is what plants just grew there naturally without any cultivation at all. Are they really all weeds, or might some of them be desirable plants? If you have a very inaccessible part of your slope, maybe just a wall of rock, you might be quite happy to let whatever grows there grow. And if it's pampas grass, maybe not. Scotch broom, something highly invasive, no. But if you've got ivy or cotoneaster or succulents, maybe that's acceptable. Maybe that's okay. Maybe you don't fight that particular part of the slope. So take a look at what you have and try to identify it. And what kind of plants grow can tell you if there's a lot of water or no water. So if succulents are popping up and doing well, obviously they're not a high water area. If you see horsetail only wants to grow where there's lots and lots of water. It doesn't do well in dry spaces. So if you see horsetail pop up, that's telling you you've got water in that spot. That's important to know. The other thing, when you're digging for your sample, your soil sample, go ahead and fill that hole with water and time how long it takes to drain. So if it drains in an hour or less, that's good drainage. If it drains more than a day, takes more than a day to drain, that's bad drainage. Everything else is sort of in between. But if it drains, that's the important thing. If it doesn't drain at all, that's also good information. Then you don't waste your time planting in a hole that's going to fill up with water. And I can't stress this enough, but it's really important to plan out your access points before you start planting. So, do you think you're going to be able to have to hire Spider-Man to reach your garden? That's not necessarily realistic. And if you do and someone gets hurt, you're not going to be happy about that. Certainly not if it's you getting hurt. So I would say the first thing, either plant the most accessible part first and just keep your brain thinking about the rest of it, or put in your pathways first, put in your stairways first. And if you have a wide slope or a wide yard, put in more than one stairway. I have been to several gardens where they put in one stairway at the far end of the yard, and every time you wanted to go up the hill, you had to go all the way over there, up the stairs, even though where you really wanted to go was over here. So maybe you put one stairway up the middle, split the difference. Maybe you put 2 stairways. They don't have to look exactly alike, One of them might be more of a little path, but it should be a way that you can access the garden in all stages of your life, not just now when you're able-bodied, but in the future. So good railings, that sort of thing. So plan that out. And yeah, maybe you can't put in 2 staircases right away, but at least put in 1. And then on the slope, you might have terraces, you might have pathways. Be sure those pathways are flat and wide so you're not, just so that you can pull a weed. Because guess what? If it's too hard to get up there and pull weeds, you're not going to pull weeds. It's just like that. So again, cut your job into pieces. Instead of saying, I want my whole yard to look like Sunset Magazine this year. Okay, I want the part I can reach to look like Sunset Magazine, and I want a stairway. That's how far I'm going to go this year. Okay, or I'm going to get a water source put up on top of the hill. And next year, I'll connect that to a drip system. And then in the next year, I'll start planting. So cut it into pieces, but just to reward yourself, plant a little part that's close and easy to get to so that you're not only building stairs and putting in water and nothing else. Yes, do something to reward yourself. Maybe you get a big container and you put it kind of front and center, somewhere easy for you to reach and water. It may not live there forever, but it fills your vision and it fills your space, and you've got something pretty to look at and to occupy your mind while you're plotting and planning the rest of your slope. Okay. You may also want to determine the percent of your slope. So I included a little bit of math here, and I just want to go over this with you. Essentially, you take pointed wooden stakes and you hammer them into the ground at, I would say, 10-foot intervals, so that, something that's easy to measure. So when you count the stakes, you're like, oh, 3 stakes, that's 20 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet, and so on. And then you tie a string and you make that string 100% straight. So that means you're going to tie it pretty high on one stake and pretty low on the last stake. And then you measure this height and you measure this height and you minus that. And that gives us our rise. And we measure the length of the string, and that gives us our run. And I don't love math, but this is, I can follow this. I think we can all follow this. So rise over run gives us the percentage of slope. Now we're going to have to obviously move our decimal point back to get a percent. So let's just do an example, okay? So let's say that this is 2 feet and this is 1 foot. So what's our rise? It's a 1 foot rise, okay. And let's say that our run is 2 feet. So that's 50%. So if we take 1 foot divided by 2 feet, what do we get? 0.5 or 50%. Oh, that doesn't sound right. Let's try something else. Let's say this is 50 feet. Okay. 1 divided by 50. Yeah. And then we move that decimal point over and we get a 5% slope. So that's not a very big slope. Okay. But let's say that this was 10 feet. Now we have 1 over 10. So what's our slope percentage?
10%.
I'm sorry?
10%.
10% slope. So that's a lot steeper. So the distance of the run and how much rise you get, it really changes depending on, if this is a shorter run, you've got a much steeper slope, essentially. Now, why do you want to bother? Well, it's just good to know that if you have about a 10% slope, you can probably DIY that. But if it's getting more than that, you're going to probably want some help with building terraces and staircases and that sort of thing, and retaining walls. So having a steep slope can lead to erosion problems, but also completely flat ground can be flooded. So a slight slope, especially if it's running away from the building, that's actually pretty useful. So you don't necessarily want 100% flat. Okay, so a couple of design techniques that you can use, and I put that in your handout. You can build swales, and swales can be already where you have natural contour. So the water will sink into it, and you can fill that contour with a topsoil and some gravel and some straw, as is on here. This is from Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. If you have that book, or you could check it out, and there's a whole bunch of pictures from there. And so what this does is basically, let's say here you have a natural contour. You put the swale in here, and then the water, instead of running straight down the hill, it's got somewhere to go. It just slows down a little bit. And you can do that wherever you have a natural dip in your contour. Okay, so that's one option. Another option I've seen is that when people plant, they don't plant in straight lines, but they plant kind of in staggered rows. So, and they build little berms or even fish scale swales, as you see in the picture, so that instead of having everything go in one place, now we're looking at the front of the hill. We have, here's a tree, here's a tree, here's a tree. And as the water goes down slope, it kind of is getting caught in these little fish scale swales. Sometimes I've even seen these be sort of built up with boulders. So instead of a full terrace, they're just building little sort of half circle terraces and planting in those. And that slows the water down when they're not lined up. What we don't want to do is cause water to have a straight channel down. A lot of early designs and engineering was all about get that water off, get it out of the site, move it on, move it into the gutter. But if we're gardening, and especially in a drought situation or a seasonal drought situation like we have, we actually kind of want to try to capture that water on site. And there's a saying, slow it, spread it, and sink it. You probably heard that. So those are, when we observe where the natural places for water to stop are and where the natural places for water to go are, we can play with that. We can enhance that. So that's part of the observation process.
Metal stake into any slope, you add soil to it.
What's the sling made out of?
Yeah, on the internet, I know it's not always true.
Yeah.
They show it like in fabric material that water can seep through.
Uh-huh.
But the dirt holes.
Okay.
And they are taking metal stakes and staking it down, and the slings can be, 36 inches, 20 inches in plants. Then.
So it sounds like it's kind of like making little tiny swales.
That's exactly right. It's like your own swale to stop the flow of water and the flow of dirt.
The one thing I wonder though, and I does anybody else use this material? Yes? What's been your experience?
It's okay, but I'm worried about, put it on there because
Uh-huh.
so we have to put the ground cover.
Okay. Yeah, that could work. I just wonder if depending on what you're planting, if there's enough soil volume being captured for a bigger tree or shrub. If it's for small ground cover, that will probably work okay.
Like a perennial.
Yeah.
That
But if you were trying to plant trees, you might have a problem with the roots might be constricted, or they might have trouble getting out of that fabric. I just don't know. I'd have to do more research. But I would say that if there's something that can stop and control water and keep it from just floating right on down the hill, then give it a try. But I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy 50 of them. Like, you might try in a section of your hill, and again, a section that you can access, because anything you try new, you want to be able to monitor it. So without hiring Spider-Man. Yes. Uh-huh.
Softer than the other parts.
Mm.
So I'm trying to figure out what to do. And sometimes
Yes, you can put in a plant and plant it in a gopher basket. But yeah, in terms of the erosion, that may need an engineered response, like a retaining wall. And last year when I gave this talk, a friend of mine who was an architect was here, and she sent me some stuff about making gravity walls using blocks. So that's the last page of your handout. It may not work for your project, but what's nice about it is that the walls are hollow. The blocks are hollow, so they're light, and then you fill them with soil. And so it looks like it could be a very good engineering solution, especially if access is difficult for moving heavy materials. So check it out. It might not work for your project, but it talks a little bit about different degrees. Again, if you have more than a 10% slope, you may want to talk to somebody who designs it, a soil engineer, before you start planting. Set up yourself for success. Have your pathways, your stairways, and at least have it planned out. You don't necessarily may not have the time or money to install it all this year, but at least kind of know where you're going and plant the part that has the infrastructure intact. And among those things, I would definitely say irrigation. Drip irrigation is the best way to get water slowly into the soil. Standing up on top with a hose, it's scary and you lose a lot of water. Lawn sprinklers, again, they're throwing a lot of water around. Lawn sprinkler output is measured in gallons per minute. Drip emitter are measured in gallons per hour. So that's a lot slower. Now, people tell me I hate drip irrigation. And I think what we all hate about drip irrigation are those little bitty spaghetti tubings. Am I right? Right. And this is how I learned in the 90s when I'm working for a landscape company is you have your 1/2-inch tubing, your plastic drip tubing, but that doesn't drip anything. Every plant you have, you make an individual connection and you run a spaghetti tubing to every individual plant, and you make either a little circle of emitters or you do the devil horns. You know what I'm talking about? Like the tubing with one emitter on each side. And yeah, that's crazy making, especially when the plant grows and you put the emitters around the root ball as it was when you planted it, and now it's wrapped around the trunk, or it's completely watering and soaking the trunk, and the roots that are absorbing water are really way the heck out here. So yeah, spaghetti tubing is terrible, but the good news is you don't have to use spaghetti tubing, because the 1/2-inch line, you can buy that has emitters already spaced. Every 12 inches is common, every 18 inches is a possibility. And those emitters each put out 0.6 gallons per hour very readily along a pretty long run, assuming that your water source is above where the emitters are emitting. Okay, if your water source is below, it may be less than 0.6 gallons per hour. But again, it's better than the spaghetti tubing, because the skinnier the tubing, the less water pressure you have. If you are running spaghetti tubing up a hill, by the time it gets to the top of the hill, you're getting nothing out of it. If you run 1/2-inch emitters up a hill, You might get something out of it because you're not reducing in diameter. But ideally, you have a water source at the top of the hill, whether that's a hose bib or irrigation valves, and then you put your drip system attached to that with a controller, either that is a hose bib controller or something that is wired to the valves. And then you just make stripes of 1/2 inch emitter line. This is sometimes called a drip grid, but it's not crisscross, it's stripes. And you just place them, well, I'll draw it, but essentially, these are my emitters. They're spaced 12 inches apart, 0.6 gallons per hour. And I just make stripes. And I connect them with elbows. And these could have emitters or not have emitters. So these are running sort of parallel to the hill, right? Yeah, you don't go up. I mean, the cross piece might go up. So here's up, here's down. And I'll just put in, and we don't want to put, if this is finally the flat, we don't necessarily want a drip line right there because we know that the water is going to go down. So maybe we stop our run of lines. And then here's our water source. And from that, we run tubing that has no emitters until we get to where the garden is. And then we start running it with emitter line. So this is called line source drip, and it's a big improvement over all that spaghetti tubing. Then when you plant, you know that you've got an emitter every 12 inches, and this distance may vary depending on the slope, but 12 to 24 inches. And so when you plant, you know where those emitters are, and you just, or you find them, and then you plant kind of in between them. You don't have to jam your plant right up against the emitter because that water is going to flow down. And then you run it, and then you time how long it takes for the water to run off. So this is important information. You want to know, does it take 10 minutes for that water to run off into the street or somewhere I don't want it to go? Does it take 20 minutes? Does it take 5 minutes? You want to program your irrigation runs to avoid runoff. And that may mean that you use multiple start times. And that's the beauty of having a timer. Instead of running it manually and forgetting to turn it off, you attach it to a timer, which could be as simple as a battery-powered hose bib timer if you just have one watering zone, or it could be a more complicated system if you have different zones where plants have different water needs and must have different schedules. And that's something you want to think about. Plants in the sun want a different schedule than plants in the shade. Plants in a raised bed where you might have imported topsoil, probably going to have a different watering schedule than plants in the native soil. So that's something you want to think about and plan out.
When planting a slope, if you want to use the ground cover, you're probably going to do them. At least I was always taught to do a ground cover in a grid. It's a square box to start with. Got plants, one plant in the middle, and then you got, you don't want spaghetti or this inch stuff. You want a pop-up in the middle of that pops up for.
If you're going to plant only ground cover, you could use not pop-up lawn sprayers, but you could use micro sprayers, which are kind of like produce misters, and they attach to drip tubing. But if you're going to plant anything that gets taller than the micro sprayers, I wouldn't use micro sprayers, because what will happen is, and I've seen this, people used micro sprayers. They were lazy. They didn't want to use spaghetti tubing. So they just put 4 micro sprayers, one in every corner. And then the plants got taller than the micro sprayer. And so when you turn on the irrigation, you hear little teeny bit, you can't see the water anywhere. Because it's all basically spraying down at the bottom of these shrubs that have gotten so tall. The other thing about micro sprayers or lawn sprinklers is if it's windy like today, your water may not go where it's supposed to go. If it's the arc of the sprayer, there's usually a dead zone underneath. So you have to have multiple sprayers and you have to fiddle with their, throw. So I don't love micro sprayers except for very, very specific conditions. If you're planting only flat ground cover, then yes, you can use micro sprayers if nothing is ever going to get taller than that micro sprayer. But do know that it's throwing water kind of quickly, and that water may not have the chance to really percolate and get into the ground. So again, drip emitters are going to be the best for that. And using 1/2-inch tubing and all the 1/2-inch components, it's a lot more sturdy. The little spaghetti tubing is so easy to trip over, to get pulled out of the lines, to break. The 1/2-inch tubing is a lot more stable and sturdy. So that's really what I would recommend. And I would recommend that you plan out your irrigation before you buy your first plant. I know. Try not to buy any more. Because it's hard once you're planted to be all like installing tubing and stepping all over your plants and everything, but it's still worth it. I'd still recommend doing it, even though you already have plants. I'd still, don't let that be an excuse like, okay, forget it, I'm not going to install irrigation, because it's really going to save you a lot of time and a lot of water. The lovely thing about this drip grid too is, that these are spaced 12 inches apart. If you know how many feet of tubing you put in, you can pretty much calculate how much water you're using. You know how many emitters, you know the rate of the emitters, and we can assume that the rate is good if our water source is in the up above everything. If it's down here, then yeah, your calculations are not going to be exact. Now, nobody's asked this question yet. Why wouldn't I use soaker hose? Why would I not use soaker hose? Why would you use soaker hose? Yeah, okay. What are the things we don't like about soaker hose? They clog up because what is a soaker hose? It's basically a hose that sweats along its length. It doesn't have distinct emitters and not emitters. It sweats the whole way. So they can clog up. Also, they can rip and break. And how easy are they to repair? Not easy. No, I have seen there is a brand that has ways to connect and you could splice in a connector. But the other thing that makes it a deal breaker for me, soaker hose emits inconsistently along its length. It emits more closer to the water source and less further from the water source. That's crazy making. How are you going to plan your schedule when some plants are going to get overwatered, some are going to get underwatered? And if you have a problem with water pressure, you might get some plants that have no water. So again, soaker hose for a garden setting is not a great idea. If you have one tree and you just want to put a soaker hose in a circle around the perimeter for quick watering, okay. But I wouldn't use it otherwise. Yes. Zone cheating. So ideally you would not mix plants with different water needs in the same area. We would plan out our garden to have hydrozones where we have the more water need plants together and the less water need plants together. If for some reason that you can't do that, you got what you got, you can do some hydrozone cheating by basically putting more emitters in some place and less emitters in other places. So instead of having a nice, neat grid, you might say, all right, in this area here, I need to punch in a few extra button emitters. And I think we all know what those button emitters look like. You take your punch and so yes, every 12 inches is a built-in emitter, but you're going to add a couple extra button emitters and water more in that spot. But I would work hard to avoid being in that situation. So if you have say a bunch of succulents tucked in with some higher water need plants, maybe you just move the succulents, or transplant the higher water need plants, which is difficult. Succulents are easier to move. But do try, if you can, to plan out hydrozones and to have a different program for each of those. Now, if you don't go for a big multi-valve system with an electronic controller and you're just working off hose bibs, some hose bibs do have 2 programs in their brain. You can get some of those. I highly recommend the Urban Farmer Store in the Richmond Annex. Those guys are great. I don't shop anywhere else but the Urban Farmer. I go to the one in San Francisco. Tell them that you have, I have some raised beds and I have some native soil plants, or I have some containers and I have some plants in the ground. I need 2 different drip programs, and they can show you a hose bib timer that will hold 2 programs. I've also seen with the right amount of adapters, people put 2 different timers on the same hose bib, or they put a second hose bib. So there's ways around it if you aren't going to go with a plumbed in system that has valves and electronic controller. But wherever you do put the controller, whether it's hose bib or electronic, put it somewhere where it's easy to reach. I have gone to so many gardens and had to crawl under their house to get to the irrigation controller, or I can't find the irrigation controller. It's hidden somewhere in the basement. And you have to, in order to test the irrigation, you have to run out of the garden, lock the gate because you don't want anybody, the deer getting in, run downstairs, lock the door so nobody gets into the basement, turn on the irrigation, run back out, lock, unlock, and then see if the thing is dripping. It's crazy making. Now, again, if you're on a slope, yeah, your hose bib is probably, up the top of the stairs. At least put it near the stairs. Maybe we do that much so that when you go up, you don't also have to run across. Or maybe you bring a friend and you put them at the hose timer and then you look at the irrigation. So again, plan out how the garden is going to get taken care of. Even if you plan to hire people to do it, you want it to be possible for people to do it, right? Because if it's difficult, either you're going to have a lot of turnover, people are going to quit, not take your garden for long, or they're going to cut corners because it's difficult and they're not getting paid enough. And so either way, you don't want that to happen. So set it up to be as easy as possible where you could even do it yourself and whoever you hire could easily reach the timer, the irrigation tubing. We don't need to bury the irrigation tubing underground. That's a big problem because if we turn it on and look for leaks, we might not see that a tubing has a leak if it's buried underground. Whereas if it's just underneath the mulch where it's hidden and nobody can see it, and you have a leak, you're going to get a big fountain of water shooting up into the air. It's going to be super easy to tell that you have a leak and super easy to fix. If it's buried underground, first off, to even find it and fix it, you have to dig in a big pile of mud. And then you have to wait for that water to drain before you can actually plug up your irrigation. So, yes. So that's going to depend on if you're going to use a hose end timer or you're going to do a proper plumbed system. Then talk to your irrigation contractor about the best location, okay? I'm not a contractor. I do a lot of, I've done a lot of forensics on irrigation in terms of why doesn't this work? Sometimes I find like tubing from different zones was connected to the wrong zone, and that's why this part of the garden isn't getting any water because it's running on that other zone. But when it comes to the plumbing, I let the contractors do that and the backflow preventer. But if you're using a hose end system, there's a small part called a vacuum breaker that serves as the backflow preventer, and that is screwed in underneath the timer along with a filter and pressure regulator. So when you go to the Urban Farmer, I saw your hand, you say, I want a hose end timer and all the stuff that goes with it, and they throw all that stuff in the basket for you. And so there is a vacuum breaker, which basically backflow preventer means the water goes out into your irrigation. When it shuts off, some of it comes back, and we want to keep that from getting in your potable water system. So on a hose end timer, this little piece of plastic or brass that just threads in underneath your timer, serves as the backflow preventer. And below that is a filter and pressure regulator. Don't cheap out, get all that stuff. Okay, yes.
I hope you would touch this problem. Okay, this issue. You have a slope.
Yes.
Okay? I have fruit trees on my slope.
Okay? Uh-huh.
You have a slope. Okay. You put any tree, brush. Okay. I'm trying, even if it's on the slope, I'm still where the plant is. I want some area around it level.
Yes.
Okay. Level, because
yes.
Okay. So, because otherwise, I'm even asking you. I mean, I can plant something without leveling around.
Understood.
So then, when I water, like I water with a hose, the water just goes down. You
right.
can't even water it.
So before you plant the tree, you do need to sort of contour a sort of partial terrace. So you may not terrace the whole thing into stairs, but you make sort of a partial terrace so that you do create a sort of a half moon shaped level area, plant your tree, and then you can sculpture the soil into sort of a berm to capture the water. But you got to do that before you plant the tree. I mean, you can after, but what we don't want to do is bury the trunk of the tree too deep, because trees don't like that. So a tree has a natural flare at the base of the trunk. Even if it's grafted, it might be grafted here. But this is where the roots start. And we do not want to bury that. So you don't want to add soil. You want to make sure that this flare is there the whole time. So you need to sort of build around it and sculpture the soil below it.
So like how many feet would you do it around?
I mean, as many feet as you can, you know, depending on the size of the tree, 5 to 10 if you can. But it may just be a half moon shape because the upside, maybe leave that part alone. Okay. And that's what they did at Garden for the Environment. They have a fruit tree orchard that is on these sort of half moon shaped terraces that are bounded by broken up concrete because they took away a lot of concrete to make the garden. And it's also right next to their staircase. So when they tend the fruit trees, they go up a nice big wide staircase with banisters and flat steps. And then they just duck under the railing to get to the trees. So access is super important, especially if you have something that needs tending like a fruit tree. Okay. Garden for the Environment is at 7th Avenue and Lawton in San Francisco. I recommend you go make a day of it. It's out sort of right where the numbered avenues are, gets us closer to the beach. So for reference, 48th Avenue is the ocean essentially. So it's not quite all the way to the ocean. I am sure that there are community gardens in your area, and a lot of the land that is donated for community gardens is pretty sloped and difficult because it's less desirable for real estate developers. So I do encourage you to visit Garden for the Environment, but if you're like, that's way too far, take a look at where your local teaching gardens are, community gardens, and see if you can figure out if there's one that's sloped in your area and take a look. Yes. Uh-huh. So it depends on what else you're doing with the land. I would always say that if there's plants that need tending, you want them as accessible as possible. But sometimes the top of the slope is where the sun is. So, I mean, the one thing I wouldn't put at the top of a slope is a vegetable garden because you have to be there every day. If you want successful vegetable garden, you got to be there every day looking for bugs and harvesting. You don't want to have to climb a flight of stairs a couple times a day for vegetables. Fruit trees, on the other hand, they need tending, but only at certain times a year, right? You don't have to be there every day. So putting those on a slope like they did at Garden for the Environment, I thought that made sense because they built a very nice, wide, safe, stable staircase, and the trees are on either side of the staircase, just a few feet. and it's very easy to duck under the railing and get to those trees. So I think it just depends on how you're using the rest of the land and what is the best sun for the fruit trees. So either way, I do recommend drip. They use 1/2 inch circles for the fruit trees on these sort of half moon terraces, and it works really well. You could use flood bubblers or something like that too. The thing I don't like about flood bubblers is that they often just put a bunch of water in certain places, whereas emitter line puts a little bit of water in a lot of places. And I like that better for just general root health and root moisture. All right, we're getting close to the end. So I do want to take questions, but I also want to talk a bit about plants because that's kind of why we're all here. So these are some ground covers. This one is a rubus. It's a creeping bramble. It's in the rose family. I would say it wants an average amount of water. And then we have our yarrows. Some of these are native and some of these are native to Mediterranean climates. I would say yarrows are drought tolerant once established, but they do like water to get started. They don't really love containers because they sort of spread their roots wide. That's kind of how they... Shall I pass these around? Do you want to touch the plants? Get your hands dirty? Yarrows come in all different colors. I would say that the flower color doesn't necessarily make as big a difference as if you take a look at the difference in leaf color. So that one I'm passing around there, the moonshine, you can see that it has a blue cast to the leaf, sort of blue-gray. And blue-gray leaves are often a lot more drought tolerant than green ones because they sort of reflect the light back. They're also a little bit, got tiny hairs on them. So I would, if I had to judge, I would say that's probably a little bit going to establish faster and be a little bit more drought tolerant than the green ones. I've seen yarrows be planted in the low spot of a rain garden, meaning that's where the water sort of accumulates, and they're quite happy there. So they're not averse to water. And do be aware that all plants, native, drought tolerant, even succulents, need an establishment period. And so they are considered, all plants are high water use until established. And establishment, there's other ones up here too. Okay. Establishment is a little vague. For a plant at about this size, if you put it in the ground in the beginning of the rainy season, you might get establishment in 6 months or to a year. But if you go to the nursery and you order a big tree in a box and you plant that even this time of year before it really starts raining, it's probably going to be 3 to 5 years before it's established, and in which case you need to plan how you're going to water it. And this kind of system might not work for the tree. You may have to add, and that may be where you put in a bubbler or something like that. So it really makes a difference, time of year and specimen size. The smaller the size, the better.
Which yarrow did you say was native?
The ones that are native is just called Achillea millifolia, and it has white flowers. But there's a lot of different varieties. I think that these gray ones are not native. I think that, but they're native to Mediterranean climates. So this is euphorbia. It doesn't look like much now, but they're very tough, and they have flowers that look like little eyeballs. If you've ever seen them, very attractive. And one thing that Annie's does is, when the plants are sold, they're not always in bloom. So they're usually sized, not busting out of the pot, so that they get a chance to grow a nice root system. So that's why some of these may not look like much now, but you can look them up online, and Annie's has really good descriptions of all the plants. This is a native ceanothus ground cover. This one's called Hirstorium. There are a number of different ceanothus. And I like the Sunset Western Garden Guide. Who's got that book? They haven't published a new one since, I think, 2010, but they have a pretty comprehensive list of different cultivars of ceanothus and which ones are more or less tolerant of clay or summer water. So I would check out that chart. They have beautiful blue flowers that bloom in the spring. Okay, here's something in bloom. And these are mimulus, sticky monkey flower. And they do have white flowered versions of these, by the way. And these can take a little bit of shade. And I see these growing natively on slopes near the Crystal Springs Reservoir in San Mateo County. So, and by the side of the 280, they look lovely. If you have a bit of shade, you might think about using these Heuchera maxima, and they are rather big when they get going. And these are native coral bells. So we use a lot of hybrid coral bells in our plantings that have purple leaves or peach colored leaves. And those are a little bit, you know, they're tough, but they need a little bit more care and water. And this is the native coral bell. So it's just green with sort of white tinged with pink flowers. But they can grow in a drier shade situation. So you might consider those. Let's see what else we've got here. All right. And again, I've got the plant list on your handout. This is a Zauschneria. Again, it's not in bloom, but this does have sort of tubular, like bright orange flowers, and it reseeds itself, which is nice.
Is this one, do they call this California fuchsia?
California fuchsia, yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I think it's not Zauschneria anymore. I think the botanists have given it a different name, but a lot of us still know it as Zauschneria.
Yeah.
And here is also a Cleveland sage hybrid. So it's a native, it's hybrid, but it's a blue flowered.
And that's going to be a good size.
Yeah, so do your research, because all these plants are small now. You know, go online to Annie's if you've got some connection here, and take a look at the ultimate height and spread. I think that's super important to not plant something that you're going to have to keep cutting back, or is just going to get out of scale and you're going to wish you never planted it. So this is, again, why I'm a huge fan of what kind of gardening? Slow gardening. Understanding that you may have to live with some things that you've already got, and figure out how can we improve those conditions without disturbing the roots of the tree, for example, or ripping out everything and starting all over again, but maybe making things less wrong. And that's what I've done with a lot of irrigation systems, that they may not look like a perfect grid, but if you've got remnants or vestiges of an irrigation system, it's better to try and work with that, modify that, than rip the whole thing out. So even lawn sprinklers, that can be converted to drip without digging anything up or adding any new tubing. And then your backflow preventer and such is already installed. So that's beautiful. Yes. Yeah, Zauschneria reseeds.
Yes, all over. But it's pretty.
Yes, well, so if you don't want any more, don't plant it. But yeah, I think it's really important to know, the habit of the plants that you are planting. I still think the Sunset Western Garden Guide, although it hasn't been updated, it's got a lot of good information. I think the Annie's website is really excellent. I like how they've got the descriptions up, even for plants that are out of stock. So, you know, you can do that homework and you can figure out when they are in stock, if it's a plant you're going to want or not. Yes.
Have you been to the new town in San Francisco? All native plants.
Is that the tunnel tops?
Tunnel tops, yeah.
Yes, yes, I have.
I think they did a beautiful. I
Yes.
fielded the area, but I feel like they did a beautiful job with native plants, and the slope is huge.
It's huge, but that was a very engineered project as well. So again, you know, sometimes it can help to have your non-plant elements, such as the engineering part, taken care of first. So then you know, what is my plantable space, right? Your plantable space versus the size of the garden are two different things. Some of that space is going to be taken up with pathways and stairways and walls and that sort of thing. And so figure that out first, and then figure out where's my plantable space. And that may be this thing I want to look out the window. So maybe I'm going to say, well, that's where I want my plantable space to be. And so in order to get there, I'm going to need a path here. I'm going to need stairs here. I'm going to need the irrigation or water source here. So you can think about where your plantable space is, but some of it's dictated by the topography.
What about plug gardening? You know, where you buy commercial plugs, say 500 plugs for a slope,
Uh-huh.
and you put them up there.
Again, I still say get your water source, get your, because you could buy 500 plugs. How are you going to get up there to plant them?
What if you use a sprinkler on them to get them established, and then
How are you going to get up there to weed them?
nothing grows in mine. It doesn't. There's no weeds growing. Does that tell you something? That nothing's growing.
Okay, but if you start watering, you might get some seeds blow in.
Before I plant anything, give anything to grow.
Well, that's a thought. Or see what grows in the rainy season.
Yeah, I don't
So again, slow gardening. Yeah, I mean, if you buy 500 plugs, you're gonna you might be risking your life to get up there to plant them, and then if say something breaks with the sprinkler, you're gonna risk your life to get up there to fix the sprinkler. So I still say before investing in a 500 plugs, I would really want to be very sure that I could safely get up there to maintain it. Sorry.
I want the easy button. Where is it?
Well, all I'm saying is, you know, fill the space, something with, get something beautiful, maybe a click together raised bed or containers as a temporary eye candy until such time as you get the rest of your things sorted out. Yes.
Source or anything that you would build up there.
When you want to build a berm,
Yeah.
yeah. So a lot of permaculture websites address those sorts of things, and you could hire a permaculture consultant as well, because that is kind of where I get the whole idea about like the fish scale berms and the slow it, spread it, sink it. That's really a very main principle in permaculture. So there's a lot of good ones in our area you might want to take a look at. Yes.
Just for ground cover or slope other than creeping plants.
Well, I guess you could do mounding plants, right? I mean, if it's a ground cover, it's gonna by nature creep. You mean you don't want ones that spread by runners, like yarrow? Okay, yeah. So instead of wood mulch, okay. So the wood mulch would go in between the plants. So you're saying you want something besides plants? Run down, yeah. I mean, gorilla hair knits together well on a slope, but the danger of gorilla hair is that it repels water. And so you better have a drip tubing underneath it, or else the rain is not going to enter, or your sprinkler is not going to enter the gorilla hair. But the one good thing about gorilla hair is it doesn't fall down a slope very easily. Gorilla hair is shredded redwood bark. So it really does look like, it really looks almost like orangutan hair. It's red colored, and it's fibrous, and it's used in a lot of landscapes, but on the flat, I wouldn't recommend it because it does repel water. It's redwood bark, you know? So, but it kind of knits together and makes like felt almost. So that's probably, if you got irrigation, what I'd recommend. If you don't have irrigation, I really think about it, really have to think about it. You might want to think about creating flat areas to put the mulch, either sort of half moon shaped terraces or rectangular terraces, depending what you're going to do. So trying to keep this talk as general as possible because everybody's conditions are different. And also we have only 1 hour, which is already up, I'm sorry to say. Thank you for listening. Feel free to come on up and look at the plants. If you've got questions, feel free to, I'll be here for a few minutes. So
Thank you.
thank you.